The machine weighed 65,000 pounds. It was sinking. Not fast, nothing about this happened fast, but steadily, with the slow certainty of something that cannot be argued with. The rear axle had dropped maybe 8 inches into the field. The cab tilted just enough to notice. And somewhere inside the machine's nervous system, a sensor read the angle, cross-referenced the wheel slip data, and made a decision that no one in that field had asked it to make. It locked the drivetrain. That's the part that will take some explaining. It was late October in central Illinois, a Tuesday morning, the kind of day that looks fine from the kitchen window, but turns on you the moment you step into the field. The sky was the color of old tin. The ground had taken 3 inches of rain over the preceding weekend. And the soil, heavy black Illinois clay, had absorbed it the way a sponge absorbs water, completely, and with no intention of giving it back. The farmer's name was Dale. He had been running this operation for 31 years, same ground his father had farmed before him, and he knew what that clay did after a hard rain. He had planned to wait another day before sending his combine in, but the forecast called for more rain on Thursday, and the corn needed to come out, and sometimes in farming, all your choices are bad ones, and you just pick the least bad. He sent the combine in at 7:40 in the morning. The machine was a late-model flagship combine, 16-liter engine, 18-row corn head, a 400-bushel grain tank, and a retail price that hovered around $1.2 million fully equipped. It had GPS auto-steering, predictive terrain mapping, our automatic header height control, and a telematics system that sent real-time performance data to a cloud platform accessible from a smartphone. It had sensors for ground speed, engine load, rotor speed, grain loss, fuel consumption, moisture content, and slope angle. It was, by every measure the manufacturer could apply, a monument to modern engineering. It also had no idea what to do about central Illinois clay after a hard rain. The trouble started about 40 minutes into the field. The machine was working the north end, where a low area collected runoff from the surrounding slopes, a place Dale called the Bowl, a quarter-acre depression that caught water the way a cupped hand catches rain. In a dry year, you'd never notice it. That October, it was holding water 2 inches below the soil surface. Invisible until you were in it, the combine's front header hit the soft zone first. The machine slowed. The engine load climbed. The rear axle began to spin rather than grip, and the wheels chewed down through the surface crust into the saturated clay beneath. The GPS system logged the stall in position. The telematics system sent an alert. Dale, watching from the edge of the field, saw the combine stop moving forward. He called the cab. His operator, a hired hand named Keith, who had been running combines for 11 years, told him the machine had bogged in and was spinning. Keith engaged the differential lock and tried to back out. The rear wheels grabbed a little, then lost it again. He tried forward. Nothing. Tried reverse a second time with more throttle. And the machine rocked slightly and settled deeper. Then Keith went quiet for a moment. "It's showing a fault," he said. What had happened, what the machine's onboard diagnostic system had determined in its thorough and unhelpful way, was this. The excessive wheel slip, combined with the sustained drivetrain load and the chassis tilt angle, had triggered a cascade of protective responses. The transmission control module had registered an overheat warning on the rear differential. The stability monitoring system had flagged the slope angle threshold, and because the operator had been alternating between forward and reverse torque under high load, the drivetrain protection logic had engaged a torque-limiting protocol designed to prevent catastrophic axle failure. In plain language, the machine had decided it was in danger of breaking itself, and it had throttled back its own drivetrain to prevent that outcome, which meant it now had almost no ability to move under its own power. Keith read Dale the fault codes over the phone. There were 4 of them. The most significant was a transmission protection lockout, a condition that, according to the manufacturer's service manual, required the machine to be recovered to a level surface before full drivetrain function could be restored. Dale stood at the edge of the field for a long moment, looking at his combine sitting in the bowl. "How bad's it sunk?" he asked. Keith measured it the old way with his arm. "Rear axles about to the lower rim." That was 16 inches. Over the next 2 hours, Dale made phone calls. The first was to his dealer, 45 minutes away. The dealer's service manager told him they could be there by early afternoon, but getting the machine to stable ground was Dale's problem first and their problem second. The second call was to a neighbor 3 miles up the road who owned a large 4-wheel drive tractor, a current model row crop unit with front-wheel assist, 370 horsepower, and dual rear tires. The neighbor brought it over within the hour. They rigged a tow chain to the combine's front axle and pulled. The tractor's duals began spinning on the wet headland almost immediately. They tried at a different angle. Same result. 370 horsepower, it turned out, was not close to enough. The combine was 65,000 pounds of inert mass on saturated ground, and the traction simply wasn't there. By noon, the situation had grown into something with an audience. The dealer's white service truck had parked on the gravel road. A few neighboring farmers had seen the situation on their way past and stopped. And with the service truck had come someone no one had expected, a regional sales and product specialist from the manufacturer's district office, a man named Garrett. Garrett was 34 years old, based out of Indianapolis, and he had driven out that morning not because anyone had specifically requested him, but because a $1.2 million machine going down during harvest was the kind of event that generated attention at the regional level, and Garrett had developed a professional habit of being present for events that generated attention. He wore a fleece vest with the manufacturer's logo embroidered on the chest, clean boots that had not yet encountered the field, and the expression of a man who has explained complex systems to skeptical audiences many times and found the exercise largely unrewarding. He stood near the service truck with a tablet showing live telematics data from the stuck combine, and he used phrases like system protective response and intelligent drivetrain management, while Brandon, the service technician, nodded politely, and Dale listened with the specific patience of a man who has stopped arguing. "The machine is doing exactly what it's designed to do," Garrett said. He swiped through the telematics dashboard with the ease of someone who had given this presentation before. "The torque limiting protocol prevents axle damage in precisely this kind of situation. That's not a failure. That's the system working." Dale looked at his combine sitting in the field. "The system working," he said. "Correctly," Garrett said. A silence followed that particular exchange, in which Dale said nothing further, and Garrett seemed not to notice. When the 370 horsepower tractor failed to move the combine, Garrett watched from the road with his arms folded and offered no commentary. When a neighbor's skid steer attempt also failed, he scrolled through his tablet and made a note. He pulled Brandon aside at one point and asked about the timeline for getting the machine cleared, mentioning twice that prolonged downtime during harvest was a metric tracked at the regional level. Brandon told him he needed the machine on stable ground first. It was around 12:30 that Dale made his third call, the one to his Uncle Orville, and it was around 1:15 that the situation at the field edge changed in character. Garrett heard it before he saw it. A sound from the county road to the north. A deep, uneven diesel rhythm, low frequency, the kind of mechanical voice that doesn't come from anything built in the last 30 years. He looked up from his tablet. A neighboring farmer named Gene, who had been standing quietly nearby since noon, said simply, "That'll be the TD-24. The tone was flat, informational, the way you'd announce the arrival of something inevitable. The transport trailer came into view first, a long flatbed pulled by a medium truck, and on the flatbed sat a machine that Garrett's eyes apparently needed a moment to process. It was a crawler tractor, track-mounted, open station, no cab, no glass. A silhouette from a different era entirely. Dark with age and use, the tracks wide and heavy, the engine cowl a plain steel box with no aerodynamic considerations whatsoever. It looked less like a vehicle and more like something geological, something that had been here before the road and would be here after it. Garrett actually laughed. It was a short sound, involuntary, the kind of laugh that escapes before the social brain catches up. He looked at Brandon and then back at the approaching trailer. "That's the plan?" he said. Nobody answered him. "What is that, 60 years old?" He turned to Gene. "You're seriously going to try to pull a $1.2 million machine out of the ground with that?" Gene looked at the TD-24 on the trailer. Then he looked at Garrett with an expression that was not quite a smile. 71 years old, Gene said. "And yeah," Garrett opened his mouth and then closed it. "I mean," he gestured at his tablet, still live with the combine's telematics. "There are protocols for equipment recovery, properly rated recovery vehicles, certified rigging specifications. There's a process." He lowered the tablet slightly. "That machine doesn't even have, what are the recovery load ratings on it? Where's the documentation?" Gene looked at the TD-24 coming off the trailer, then back at Garrett. "Orville's the documentation," he said. Orville brought the TD-24 off the trailer without ceremony. He was 81 years old, and he drove the crawler the way he always drove it, with the two steering clutch levers, left hand and right hand, directing the tracks by feel and habit. No power steering, no joystick, no electronic assist of any kind. The instrument panel had 4 gauges: temperature, oil pressure, ammeter, hourmeter. The hourmeter needle pointed to a number with 5 digits. Starting the machine required a hand-primed compression release, a pony motor, a small auxiliary gasoline engine used to turn the main diesel, and patience. It was a 1954 International Harvester TD-24. 6-cylinder diesel, 141 horsepower, 62,000 pounds of operating weight. Twin tracks, each 24 inches wide and over 12 feet long, distributing that weight across a contact area calculated to exert less ground pressure per square inch than a person walking. It had been built to move the earth, and it had been doing exactly that in one form or another for 7 decades. Orville drove it into the field without hesitation. The tracks found the ground underneath the saturated surface and kept moving. The combine sat motionless in the background, a dark shape against the gray sky. He brought the TD-24 around to the rear of the combine in a wide arc and positioned the crawler about 30 feet behind the stuck machine's rear axle. His grandson climbed down from the fender, and together they began rigging the pull. What they had brought was not a simple tow chain. Orville had loaded a set of heavy winch lines, each rated to over 100,000 pounds working load, along with a snatch block arrangement that would redirect the pull and multiply the effective force. The setup took about 20 minutes. The attachment ran from the TD-24's rear drawbar through a snatch block anchored to the hitch of Gene's 370 horsepower tractor. Parked on firmer ground 40 feet to the side, engine off, he's sitting dead weight, and back to a reinforced tow point on the combine's rear frame. The arrangement wasn't just pulling the combine backward, it was pulling it at a calculated angle, designed to break the suction seal the clay had formed around the tires. When saturated clay grips a buried tire, it creates a vacuum bond that can require more force to break than the initial weight of the machine. Orville had thought about the physics on the drive over. He had been thinking about how machines move through difficult ground for most of his adult life, and the thinking came naturally to him. Garrett had walked out to the field edge to watch the rigging. He studied it in silence for a moment. "What's the working load on that snatch block?" he asked. "Plenty," said Gene. Chi-Hu had followed him over. "That's not a specification." "No," Gene agreed pleasantly. "It's experience." Garrett looked at the rigging. He looked at Gene's tractor being used as a dead anchor. He looked at the TD-24. Something in his expression had shifted slightly. The fluency had gone out of it, replaced by something more cautious. He almost said something further, and didn't. Orval climbed back into the operator's seat. He set the throttle, aligned the machine with the pull direction, using the left clutch lever, and looked back once at the rigging. He nodded to his grandson, who relayed the signal to Keith in the combine's cab. Keith's instructions were simple. Raise the header clear of the mud first, then apply light reverse throttle. Not enough to drive the machine out, which the lockout would prevent anyway, but enough to work with the pull rather than against it, bleeding a few percentage points off the dead weight the TD-24 would have to overcome alone. The transmission lockout had reduced the drivetrain's output, but the wheels could still turn under light load. It was a marginal contribution. In situations like this, margins mattered. Orval dropped the TD-24 into first gear. The engine note changed, that deep clatter finding a lower, harder register, the sound of something doing the thing it was built to do. The tracks bit into the ground. The winch lines came taut. The snatch block took the load. Gene's tractor settled slightly on its hitch as the anchor force transferred. For a moment, nothing moved. Garrett, standing at the field edge, had put his tablet down on the hood of a nearby truck. He was watching the machines with his arms at his sides. The presenting confidence, the rehearsed ease, had gone quiet. He stood with the stillness of a man holding his conclusions in suspension, waiting. That moment lasted about 4 seconds. Then the clay let go, not gradually, not in stages. The suction seal that the combine's tires had formed with 30 inches of saturated Illinois clay broke all at once, a deep, wet, tearing concussion, like a thunderclap heard through water. The combine lurched backward 2 feet in a single movement. Mud and black water erupted from around the tires in a fan that reached 30 feet in every direction. The TD-24's tracks dug down half an inch and kept pulling. Orval didn't stop. He held the throttle steady, both hands on the clutch levers, and the combine came out of the bowl in a slow, continuous arc, backward and at an angle, rear tires dragging long ruts through the clay, until all 4 wheels were on firmer ground and the machine was clear of the low area entirely. The whole extraction, from the moment the clay broke to the moment the combine was clear, took 47 seconds. There was a stillness after it was over, the kind that follows something that resolved faster and more completely than anyone had quite prepared themselves for. And in that stillness, if you had been watching Garrett rather than the machines, you would have seen something happen to his face. It was not theatrical. It was not the exaggerated shock of a man being proven wrong in a movie. It was quieter and more specific than that, the visible recalibration of someone whose working model of the world has just been revised without their permission, while they are still standing upright and trying to maintain composure. His mouth had opened slightly when the clay broke. He had taken a half step forward without meaning to, pulled by the sound of it. That concussive, elemental release. When the combine swung clear and the TD-24 settled back to idle, Garrett stood very still for a long moment, looking at the 2 machines. Then he looked at the TD-24 specifically, at the open operator's station, at Orval sitting in it, doing nothing dramatic, not surveying the crowd, not acknowledging the applause that wasn't there, just sitting in the seat the way a man sits in a chair in his own kitchen, one hand on the throttle, the other resting on his knee, the engine ticking down toward idle. 47 seconds. Garrett picked up his tablet from the truck hood. The screen was still showing the combine's live telematics, drivetrain status, GPS position, all systems nominal now that the machine was on level ground. He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he lowered it. Jean was standing about 6 feet away, not looking at Garrett, watching the field. "How many hours on that machine?" Garrett asked. His voice was level, but the presenting tone was gone from it entirely. It was just a question. "The TD-24? "Yeah." Jean thought about it. "Orville'd know better than me, but it's been running since Eisenhower was president." A pause. "So, a few." Garrett nodded slowly. He looked at the TD-24 one more time, at the 4 gauges, the open seat, the tracks still carrying black Illinois clay. And he did not say anything about intelligent drivetrain management. And he did not say anything about system protective responses or certified rigging specifications or regional performance metrics. He picked up his bag and walked toward Brandon and the combine, because that part was still his job and he still knew how to do it. Brandon connected his laptop to the combine's diagnostic port, ran the clearing sequence, and watched the fault codes resolve one by one. With the machine on stable ground and the drivetrain no longer under load, the system accepted the reset without resistance. All 4 faults cleared. Differential temperature within normal range. No damage recorded. 11 minutes, start to finish. Keith drove the combine to the field edge under its own power, parked it on the gravel road, and climbed down to look at the mud-caked rear tires. He stood there for a moment without saying anything. "Wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't been sitting in it," he said finally. Dale walked out to where Orville was shutting down the TD-24. The engine noise diminished in stages, the way big diesels go quiet, not all at once, but in a descending series of rumbles, each one lower and further away. And then it was just the wind and the field. "What do I owe you?" Dale asked. Orville climbed down from the seat slowly, with deliberate attention to each step. "Nothing," he said. "I wanted to see if she'd still do it." He patted the side of the TD-24's engine cowl once, the way you'd put a hand on the shoulder of someone who has done good work. Then he told his grandson to get the trailer lined up. Garrett was at his company truck, loading his equipment. He had heard that exchange. He paused with his hand on the door. He looked back at the TD-24 one last time, the open seat, the 4 gauges, the tracks. Then he looked at the tablet in his other hand, the telematics screen still bright, every number nominal, all the data clean and precise and complete. He got in the truck. He sat there for a moment before starting it. Nobody was watching him. Nobody needed to be. The combine went back into the field the following morning and finished the North 40 without incident. The yield data, when it came off the monitor, was unremarkable, a good crop, nothing exceptional. The GPS track log showed a clean, orderly pattern across the field. Somewhere in that track log there was a gap, a cluster of points that didn't move for most of a morning, centered on the low corner of the field where the soil went soft. When the telematics system had logged it all in precise time-stamped detail, the fault codes, the lockout duration, the recovery coordinates, a complete digital record of everything that had gone wrong and been set right. The TD-24 left no data. It had nothing that could record where it had been. It went home to its shed and went quiet, and the only record of what it accomplished that day existed in the memories of the people who had been standing at that field edge. And perhaps, in some private recess, in the mind of a man on a flat highway heading back to Indianapolis, replaying 47 seconds that no product training had prepared him for. Orville drove past that corner of the field a few weeks later on his way somewhere else. He slowed without stopping, looked at it for a moment. Then he kept driving. Under this video, you'll see a subscribe button, a small action with a big meaning. By pressing it, You're not only supporting the creation of more content like this, but you're also becoming part of the very exchange we've been talking about, giving and receiving in harmony. It's not about the size of the action, it's about the meaning. A simple subscription tells me these words reached you. It tells me that the effort, the late nights, and the discipline to bring this message forward mattered to someone on the other side of the screen.